Some things demand a response. Some things, just by their very nature, are so controversial, polarizing, divisive, that they demand a response. Let me see if I can illustrate. This week, delegates from the worldwide Seventh-day Adventist Church voted on whether women pastors should be ordained as men pastors are. And there are people who are passionate on both sides of this particular issue. My Facebook feed, probably like yours, if you have any Seventh-day Adventist friends, has kind of been filled with everybody on the planet's opinion on the issue, whether one side or the other. This is a polarizing issue. It demands a response. People will be on one side of this issue or the other, just by the nature of it. And just to illustrate that fact, nearly 2,400 delegates from all around the world voted on this issue, and only 5 abstained. That means everyone but 0.002% of people there had an opinion on one side or another. It's an issue that demands a response. Or our country has been embroiled in a debate over the definition of marriage. Is marriage exclusively between a man and a woman, or is marriage just to be defined between two people regardless of their gender? And this is an issue that demands a response. It's controversial. It elicits emotion. It causes lines to be drawn, people to choose sides. I haven't met anybody who says, I really don't care about the issue, or I don't have an opinion. I'm sure those people exist somewhere. But even to not have an opinion or to be apathetic about the issue of marriage is to have an opinion. Because if I say, well, I don't really care how you define marriage, you have chosen a side, right? By not picking a side, I pick a side because some things by their very nature demand a response. I'm making a point that's going to lead into our message. Now, but I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying or what I'm not saying, so I just want you to hear me very clearly. I'm not saying that we should be divisive. I'm not saying that we shouldn't love and respect people we disagree with, whatever side they may be on. I'm not saying that we should choose our side and dig our trenches and go to war. That is not at all what I'm saying, because that is not the way of Jesus. What I am saying is that some things demand us to choose a side, and at points, if I'm the only one standing on that side, to stand there because I am so convicted on this particular issue, even if I'm all alone, while simultaneously loving those who may see things in a different way. And so while we're on the subject, let me just give a word of encouragement, because some of you may need a word of encouragement after the few weeks that we've been through as a nation and as a church. Because if you're anything like me, and I'm sure not all of you are, that we have people on both sides of all of these different issues right here in this room, I know that. But if you're anything like me, you ended up in the minority on both those issues. And you may need a little bit of encouragement this morning. And so I just want to encourage you, first of all, regarding the issue of women's ordination. You probably have heard, maybe you haven't, maybe you're not into these things, but that issue was voted against, was voted down. About 60% of delegates voted to say, we will not be ordaining women pastors. About 40% said that they would like to see that happen. But, so, bottom line is, we're not going to be ordaining women pastors anytime soon. But take courage, because what wasn't voted down was women in ministry and leadership. Women in ministry and leadership has been something that our church has supported from the very beginning, the Seventh-day Adventist Church as well as Newday. And so the vote wasn't about whether or not to have women pastors or ministers or leaders. It was whether or not to ordain them. And so while I was discouraged by the vote, maybe you were encouraged, I don't know, I love you, we love each other, we have mutual respect. While I was discouraged by the vote, I take courage in the fact that it wasn't a vote against women in ministry, that women will continue to have places of leadership and ministry at Newday as well as in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But a much more significant decision was announced 2 weeks ago when the Supreme Court basically redefined marriage, which was a big deal because marriage has been defined the same way since the beginning of time. And now we have a new definition of marriage. And again, this is a polarizing issue. And I understand that this is an emotive issue, that it brings out our emotions, and we feel passionately whichever side we may be on, and there's people on both sides right here in this room. But I think we can all agree when issues like this are decided, it leaves a group of people celebrating, and a group of people grieving. Right? And so regardless of whether you are celebrating this decision or whether you are grieving this decision, can we all agree on some things? That while it seems that our world is changing so incredibly fast, God does not change. And we can take courage in that. And while it may seem that at times our world has a very little of a foundation, we have a very sure foundation, and that is the Word of God. That does not change. And while it may seem that things look hopeless or despair, or you wonder where our world is going or what's happening to things around us, it feels like maybe our world is falling apart, God's promises remain. He will continue to do the things that He said He is going to do. He has a plan. And so regardless of how you're feeling about the world or your life or your family or whatever else it may be, now is not a time to despair. Let me tell you about a journey that I've been on over the last several years. But I have gone from a place of feeling very hopeless and even angry at the society in which I live because of the direction of the state of Colorado and different things that have happened in our state, to a place of genuinely feeling that the church is on the threshold of its greatest opportunity. I truly believe this. I mean, when things get dark, lights shine brighter. And the darker things get, the brighter a light can shine. And as long as we stay on mission by unconditionally loving all people, regardless of who they are or how they live, and as long as we continue to lift up Christ exclusively and hold to His word without compromise, the church will thrive. I am just so deeply convicted that we are now living in a society, in a world that is identical to the society in which the church was birthed. The first 3 centuries, 2,000 years ago, was a world very much like ours. It is a world in which all gods and all beliefs were accepted. That you could worship whatever God you want to worship as long as your God is not the only God, or you say your God is the only God. Your belief is to be tolerated as long as you say that your belief is not the only right belief. That was the world of the first 3 centuries. And so Christians were fed to the lions, and they were crucified, and they were set on fire, not for believing in Jesus. No, Jesus was fine. Believe in Jesus all you want. They were crucified and thrown to lions and set on fire because they believed in Jesus only. They said, He is the way, He is the truth, He is the life. I will not bow down to Caesar. I will not bow down to your God because I worship Jesus exclusively. And that's what got them killed. But what gave them traction in their society and in their culture was their ability to love. Love not only their own, but love those who they disagreed with, love those who were killing them and persecuting them and throwing them in prison. They loved so radically that eventually, when the spiritual thirst of those who were living far from God was awakened, and as they began to see that the way they were living needed something more, they said, we need to go to those Christians because no one loves and lives like they do. That was the world of the first 3 centuries, and that is the world we're living in today. And the church exploded in those first 3 centuries. Not because they were in political power, not because they were pointing the finger at non-Christians, telling them they should be living like Christians. They didn't expect non-Christians to live like Christians. They don't even have the Holy Spirit. But because they loved everyone unconditionally and radically. And that's our opportunity. I digressed. I don't know. Where am I? All right. Oh, yeah. Some things demand a response. Some things, by their very nature, are so controversial, so polarizing, so divisive, that they force you to choose a side. And today I want to talk about Jesus, a man who demands a response. And today we see Jesus with absolute clarity say who he believed he was. And his claims compel us to make a decision. They demand a response. We've been in a series called The Untold Stories of Jesus. And there are 4 primary stories in the Bible about the life of Jesus. We call them Gospels. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the first 3 Gospels. And they pretty much all tell the same stories. They seem to be focusing on the same events, the same timeline. There's a lot of similarity between Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But along comes John, one of Jesus' closest friends, one of his disciples, one of the inner 3. And he writes his Gospel, it seems, from the perspective of telling the stories that the other 3 left out. And as a result, 90% of what we find in the book of John is new material. It's new stories about Jesus. We wouldn't have these stories about Christ had John not written his gospel. And nowhere else in any of the other gospels do we get a sense of who Jesus is and who he thought he was like the book of John. For instance, it's in the book of John that we get what are called the 7 I am statements. 7 times Jesus will say, I am, and then he would fill in the blank, and he would give kind of a metaphor of who he believed he was and why he had come and what his purpose was. And when you look at these claims in their context, they're really rather audacious. These are the 7 I am statements in the book of John. I am, in chapter 6, I am the bread of life. He said of himself in chapter 7, I am the light of the world. I am the gate from John chapter 10. I am the good shepherd, John chapter 10 again. I am the resurrection and the life, John 11. I am the way, the truth, and the life, John 14. And I am the vine. So again, each one of these statements is an attempt for Jesus to say, this is who I am, and this is why I come. This is my function. This is what I'm here. This is what I have to offer you. And again, when you look at them in their context, these are audacious claims for any person to make. Just look at a couple of them, like, I am the vine. What Jesus is saying is, in the context, if you stay connected to me, you can do anything. You will bear good fruit in your life, but apart from me, you could do nothing. It's pretty audacious. Or, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. The only way to heaven, the only way to the Father is really through me. There's no other way. No one else is coming to save you. I am the only one. That's audacious. Or, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will never die but will live forever. I mean, who says that? Certainly no one, unless they think that they are divine. And so today we're going to look at one more I am statement. It's not included in the 7 typically, but it is the biggest. It is the most audacious of all of Jesus' claims. And again, without a shadow of a doubt, we will see who Jesus believed himself to be. And if you have a Bible, go ahead, or a Bible app, find John chapter 8. We're going to be in verses 48 through 59. We're going to pick up where Tim left off last week. Thank you, Tim, for that amazing, powerful message on freedom. We're actually going to jump in right in the middle of the same conversation that Jesus was having when he said, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. And just to give a little context, what's happening during this time? Jesus is in Jerusalem for what's called the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles was perhaps the greatest, biggest celebration in the Jewish calendar. They would come together in Jerusalem in late September, early August, and they would celebrate the fact that they just harvested their crops. But more than that, what they were celebrating was God's provision for them while they were wandering around in the wilderness for 40 years before they got into the promised land. And so they would remember the fact that God provided for them food, bread, water, meat, light, and so they would sleep in these tents made of palm branches, remembering how God miraculously provided for them shelter and the bread and the water and all that. So it's at this festival, in this context, that Jesus makes some of those I am statements. It's there he says, I am the water of life, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world. Because you're here celebrating the fact that you were provided with bread and water and light in the desert. But what I'm telling you is, while you're celebrating and worshiping God for all those things, the one who they point forward to, the one who provided them, has come into your midst. And so this takes on a huge significance when we realize this is taking place during the Feast of Tabernacles, that he says these things. He's really making some huge claims. And these statements, of course, lead to lots of misunderstanding and pushback from the religious leaders. As a matter of fact, in John chapter 7 and 8, the whole dialogue in chapter 7 and 8 is all at the Feast of Tabernacles, this 1 week that they're celebrating in Jerusalem. And most of 7 and 8 is this dialogue and kind of hot topic conversation between Jesus and the religious leaders. And in just those short 2 chapters, in that 1 week, there are 11 references to death threats and attempts to arrest Jesus, just in that 1 week. They wanted him silenced, and for good reason. But he is about to really stir things up. Toward the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, he's again in a heated conflict with the religious leaders, and we pick up the dialogue in verse 48. We're going to jump in right in the middle of a conversation. The Jews answered him, Jesus, aren't we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed? So the religious leaders are going to do what many of us do when we're losing an argument. we realize that we were outwitted and we got nothing left, we resort to name calling, low blows, right? That's what they do. They call him a Samaritan. And we saw a couple weeks ago that the Jews saw no one lower than the Samaritans. This is a racial slur against Jesus. You are nothing more than a Samaritan, and more than that, you are demon-possessed. In other words, demons have filled you and have messed up your mind, and you're saying things that are just plain crazy. Well, Jesus isn't going to even reference the racial slur, but he will address their claim that he is demon-possessed. He says, I am not possessed by a demon, said Jesus, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. I'm just trying to worship my Father, and you're here giving me a hard time. I am not seeking glory for myself, but there is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. And Jesus is going to up the argument here a little bit. I tell you the truth, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. You get the sense Jesus wasn't one to back down from an argument when it was over something important. They say he's making too much of himself, and rather than kind of de-escalating things, he escalates it. He says, you know what? If you keep my word, if you do the things that I say, if you listen to me and put into practice my teaching, you will not die, but you'll live forever. And this is really great news for those of us who are followers of Jesus, because he proved it's true by resurrecting himself. He said that would be the one thing that he would do, that we could know that he is who he said he was. 3 days after I'm crucified, I'll rise again. So we could take courage in this, but the religious leaders aren't so excited about what he has to say, and they go nearly out of their minds at this point. This time the Jews exclaim, now we know that you're demon-possessed. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say that if anyone keeps your word, he will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham? He died, and so did the prophets. Who do you think you are? I just love that question. Who do you think you are anyway? You're making too much of yourself. I mean, Jesus tells them, if anyone keeps his word, they will never die. And they point to their spiritual heroes of Abraham and the prophets, and they say, well, those guys died. They go to the two places that are the highest in all of culture and say, do you think you're better than Abraham? Do you think you're better than our prophets? It would be like today saying, who do you think you are? Are you better than Mother Teresa or Billy Graham? I mean, really, what are you making yourself out to be? And it's a great question. Who does Jesus think he is? He's about to answer the question, but not yet. Jesus replied, if I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. In other words, if I'm just here trying to make myself look good, that doesn't mean anything. I'm just bragging, right? He said, but my Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. My Father's the one making me look good through all the miracles I've been working, the fact that I'm raising people from the dead, my teaching, all this is coming from the Father. It's not from me. He's glorifying me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. Wow. So Jesus comes back to Abraham. And he says, Abraham saw this day and was glad. In other words, he saw by faith the fact that the Messiah would come to bless the entire world, that God's promises would be fulfilled through his line. And he was excited about it. But the Jews take Jesus literally, and they say, well, how could you have literally seen Jesus? You're not even 30 years old. That's what they say next. You're not yet 50 years old, the Jews said to him, and you have seen Abraham? All right, well, you can tell now, Jesus is kind of getting tired of reasoning with these unreasonable men, and he's getting ready for his his mic drop moment. It's going to be a mic drop moment. He's just like, all right, fine. So they ask him, you think you're not even 30 years old. You're not even 50 years old, and you think you've seen Abraham? How could you see him? And you can kind of imagine they're all kind of slapping each other on the back. Well, that was a good one. Man, that was really clever, man. The high fives. Yeah, we shut him up now. But Jesus is about to silence them all. I tell you the truth. Before Abraham was born, I am. Whoa. Poof, mic drop. I love that. Before Abraham was born, I am. Wow, what is Jesus saying? I mean, it sounds cool, but what in the world does that mean? I am. I am what? Is this just bad grammar? Or did John forget a word? Did he run out of ink? Did we lose like a piece of parchment in the translation? I am what? What is he saying? While this may not be clear to us, this was incredibly clear to the Jews. They knew exactly what he's saying because the very next verse tells us that they picked up stones in order to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. The conversation was over. You see, they wanted to stone him. They wanted to execute him because they believed he was speaking blasphemy. They believed he was claiming to be God, and he was. The first thing Jesus is saying before Abraham was born is he's saying, I predate Abraham. Jesus is answering the question about his age by saying, you think I'm only 30 years old, but the reality is I am before Abraham. I was before him. As a matter of fact, I didn't have a beginning because by nature I am eternal. Can you just imagine having a conversation with somebody like that? So, don't mean to be rude, but how old are you? Well, I've been alive since before Jesus. I remember Alexander the Great. And I saw the pyramids being built as well. I mean, you would probably think that person needs some psychiatric treatment. But this is the statement that Jesus makes. He's telling this crowd of listeners and us, I am eternal. I had no beginning. I have no end. I simply am. Today and always. Jesus definitely was born at a point in time. Jesus as a man. But he predates that birth. Back into infinity. He is eternal. Well, what does it mean that he is I am? What's with that? I am. Well, to really understand what Jesus is saying here, we have to go back before this conversation, about 1,500 years, to an interplay between Moses and God at the burning bush. And the story is found in Exodus chapter 3. We read that Moses is out in the wilderness of Midian, and he's tending his sheep when he sees a bush burning off in the distance, but it's not being consumed. On fire, but it's not burning up. And so he goes to it to check it out. And from there, God speaks to Moses. And this is where God will commission Moses to go back to Egypt, to confront Pharaoh, to command that he let God's people go. And Moses is like, all right, and he argues with God, but finally he's like, okay, I'm going to go. But who should I say sent me? What should I tell them? In other words, who are you? What is your name? And that is where God says, from the bush, tell them I am sent you. This is God's name for himself. I am. Not I was, not I will be, I always am. Tell them I am sent you. And that means that I am is the name of the God who spoke from the burning bush. That means that I am is the name of the God who sent plague after plague onto Pharaoh and Egypt until they finally relented and let the people go. That means that I am is the name of the God who parted the Red Sea, allowing his people to cross over on dry ground. I am is the name of the God who sent those same waters crashing back down on the enemies of his people. I am was the name of the God who provided bread and water and meat for the people as they traveled through the wilderness. I am is the name of the God whose voice thundered from Sinai, shaking the ground, making the Hebrew people beg Moses to tell him to be quiet because they were afraid they were going to die at the sound of his voice. I am was the name of the God who gave them their beloved law from the top of Mount Sinai. I am is the name of the great God of the Hebrews. And now those same Hebrews are confronting a man, asking him, who do you think you are? And he says simply, I am. I am the eternal God embodied in the flesh. I am. What do you do with that? You have to do something with it. I mean, it's a kind of statement that demands a response. A person is claiming divinity. A man is claiming to be eternal and to be God. I mean, that demands a response. I mean, just to illustrate the fact that it demands a response. Again, imagine that maybe you and I, we go to have lunch. We're just trying to get to know one another better. And as our meal comes and you start digging into your sandwich or pasta or whatever you've ordered, and you say, well, Dave, tell me a little bit about yourself. Well, I grew up in Pennsylvania. Like running, like skiing, like traveling. I have a wife, been married for 24 years, and 2 sons. And by the way, I am God in the flesh, eternity incarnate. Now, is that the kind of comment that you can just kind of like brush off like, oh, okay, well, I don't know really what to do with that, but I'm just going to forget about it. Maybe later on, you're with your spouse. Oh, I had lunch and met Pastor Dave today. He says he's God. I'm really not sure what to do with it. I'm not sure whether I believe him or not. I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, those are the kind of things that demand a response. Either you look at the evidence and say, wow, I think he is God, or you look at the evidence and say, no, he certainly is not God. He is off his rocker. It demands a response. And just look at the people who originally heard this statement. Look how they responded. They either believed him and just the overwhelming evidence that he gave, especially again saying, I'm going to be crucified 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the grave. They saw him do it, and they believed him to the point that they followed him to the death, or they picked up stones to stone him. They either fell at his feet and worshiped him as God, or they shouted to Pilate, crucify him. Really, these were the only 2 ways to respond to Jesus' claim of divinity 2,000 years ago. You either believed him and you worshiped him, or you denied his claim and wrote him off as a lunatic. And that is exactly the choice Jesus intends. He intends to leave us with this choice. On several occasions, Jesus made this clear. You either acknowledge my divinity or you disown me. You're either for me or you are against me. There is no in between. And yet today, in our culture, we have kind of created this third possible middle ground option that Jesus never intended for us to have. You know, if you ask many people today, what do you think about Jesus? Many people will tell you, well, you know, I think he was a great moral teacher. He was a good man, maybe even a prophet. I think his teachings were awesome, but he's certainly not God. I mean, that's just something that Jesus never intended, but his followers, they kind of made him more than he wanted to be. And if Jesus was alive today, he would say, why are you trying to make me out to be God? But I mean, is this third option even possible based on what Jesus is saying about himself? I mean, just think about it. When the Jewish leaders asked him, who do you think you are, God? Jesus said very clearly, yes, I am. He stated that he was not created, that he was deity. How could someone who's not God say something like that and be a good teacher? I mean, for someone to make a shocking statement like that, the choices before us are clear. There are only 3 possible answers or scenarios here. Number 1, Jesus thought he was God, or Jesus knew he wasn't God, yet told people that he was. Right? In which case he would be a liar, right? He's lying. He knew he wasn't God, but he makes the claim that he is. And he's a liar. He's not a good teacher. He's not a moral teacher. He's a deceiver trying to pass himself off as something more than he is. And so is Jesus a liar? Look at the evidence. I mean, the person whose teaching have given us ethics and morality in the Judeo-Christian world for the last 2,000 years, where integrity and honesty are so highly valued. Is Jesus a liar? We don't see him really lying anywhere else. He doesn't seem to be the lying type. Well, then the other alternative is he said he was God because he really thought he was, but he really wasn't. In which case he would be crazy, right? Delusions of grandeur. You're off your rocker. You think you're God, but you're not. Hello, earth to Jesus. We need to have a talk. Is Jesus crazy? Again, look at the evidence. Many psychologists today that Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, is perhaps the greatest picture ever given for what mental health looks like. So you're going to say that the greatest picture we have of mental health came from a crazy person. He doesn't appear to be crazy either. Or the third option is he was God. He said he was God, and he really was. And if this is the case, that means he is Lord. Lord of creation, Lord of life, holds all things together in his hands. There is no other option. Liar, lunatic, or Lord. No one's ever said this better than the brilliant mind of C.S. Lewis in the book Mere Christianity, which is a must-read for every Christian or those who are seeking spiritually for answers. You have to read Mere Christianity. But he said it better than anyone. Maybe you've heard the quote before. This is what he says. He says, I am trying here to prevent anyone from saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. He's a good teacher, but he's not God. C.S. Lewis is saying we can't say that. A man who is merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You could shut him up for a fool. You could spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you could fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. Some things demand a response. What is your response to Jesus' claim to be God? Who do you say he is? Is he a liar, lunatic, or is he your Lord? I mean, it is a dividing point, one Jesus intended to create. There's so much at stake that to dabble with this decision, to try to create some middle third artificial option is off the table. Either he's God or he isn't. And so where are you? Are you among those picking up stones at his blasphemy? Or are you among those falling at his feet? We have to decide, because to not decide is to decide. But we have to be very clear what we're deciding on. What it means to become a follower of Jesus, a Christian. Let's be clear on this. This is the essence, answering this question of what it means to follow Christ. It's not figuring out whether God created the world in 7 days. It's not figuring out how Noah got all the animals on the boat. It's not wondering whether Jonah was really swallowed by a whale. I mean, there's time to answer those questions, but that's not what it means to follow Jesus. To become a Christian simply means to answer this one question: who is he? Is he God or is he not? And when I make the decision that he is, because if he is, and I make the decision that he is, it changes everything. See, if you believe that he is God, that requires response. It requires action. It calls us to submission. I mean, if he is God, then he is our creator. And if he's our creator, then we owe him everything. If he is God, then the rest of everything he said has to be believed and taken to heart. It means that he is my boss and my Lord. He's the Lord of my life. It means that he has something to say about every area of my life, something to say about my work life, my business life, my sex life, my family life, my finances, my entertainment, how I vote. I mean, all of it is, he wants a piece of it all. He wants to be Lord of it all of my life. It all comes under his lordship. And if we recognize him as Lord, as the eternal and awesome I am, then it requires response. And so, if you have not yet begun the journey of following the I am, I just want to encourage you to do it today. And I encourage you to respond to him, just allowing your first act of belief to be worship. And as the worship team comes back up in a minute, we're going to sing a song honoring him for his name. And the reason we worship is a response from us of gratitude to him. And you could just allow the words of the song to be the words of your heart, not sung to the people around you, not sung to the worship team, not sung to the ceiling, but sung to a God who is in this place to receive our worship because of the life that he's given us. And so I would encourage you, let the worship be your first act of submission. And then afterwards, I would encourage you to come forward and talk to a prayer partner afterwards and say, you know what? I think I believe. And allow someone to pray for you and to celebrate with you.